Welcome to the latest article from Clive. Got inspired, so I carefully write them down to share them with you. Remember, may the inspiration I receive inspire you. This article is entitled In Plain View. Antonio Stradivari, born in 1644 and died 18th of December 1737, was an Italian luthier and a craftsman of stringed instruments such as violins, violas, cellos, guitars, and harps. It is estimated that Stradivari produced some 1,116 instruments, of which 960 were violins. Yet around 650 instruments still survive, including some 450 to 512 violins. He lived in Cremona, and Stradivari likely began an apprenticeship with Nicolai Amati between the ages of 12 and 14. We have his label on the 1666 violin, which reads Alumnus Nicolai Amati, Facebat, Anno 1666. However, Stradivari did not repeatedly put Amati's name on his label. Stradivari early violins actually bear less resemblance to Amati's than his later instruments do. Amati would have been a logical choice for Antonio's parents, as he represented an old family of violin makers in Cremona and lived a couple of doors up the street, and was far superior to most other luthiers in Italy. Antonio had 2 marriages, 9 children. Who stole the Stradivarius violin? It was stolen from Tottenberg by his former pupil and student, Philip Johnson, in May 1980 from his office at the Longy School of Music of Bard College, where he was then the director. Tottenberg died in 2012. The violin was later recovered in 2015 and given back to his daughters. As Philip Johnson lay dying, his little daughters are around him as well, stopped in after school and too young to process the grim scene, and there, carefully placed in the closet out of view in his room his ex-wife had set up for him, is the Stradivarius. Philip Johnson's fingers are no longer strong enough to play any violin, never mind one so unforgiving, so he keeps the Strad in a plastic crate. The instrument is the only thing he has of value. It is also his biggest secret. When he's gone, the news will shock them all, from the FBI to his family, to his daughters of Roman Tottenberg, who stand to inherit the instrument. They will ask how such a once promising, later penniless eccentric stole an 18th century violin worth millions and got away with it. After all, he was the only suspect when it was taken in 1980. As death approaches, Johnson, usually the loudest voice in the room, keeps his mouth shut. It is the fall of 2011. This has been his secret for 31 years. Johnson, who was never able to hold a job, a mortgage, or a relationship, somehow accomplished something most everyone thought impossible. He played Tottenberg Stradivarius in plain view until the end. He did this through chaos and control, by building an impenetrable wall between his past and his present. Those who suspected Johnson of the crime lost track of him. Those who knew him during the last 2 decades of his life had never heard of the Tottenberg theft. They just thought Johnson had an old violin. The trail remained ice cold even after Johnson died of pancreatic cancer 2 weeks before Thanksgiving in 2011. Then, last summer, Phan Tran, Johnson's ex-wife, decided to look into selling the violin. She had no idea it was a Strad. A friend suggested she contact Philip Ingian, a dealer in Pittsburgh. It was Ingian who, working off email photos, saw that it matched the Stradivarius built in 1734 and stolen from the Late Tottenberg. Ingian arranged to meet Tran in New York in late June. He also called the FBI. Within hours of her showing him the violin, two agents from the agency art theft team swooped in to claim the Strad. They contacted the Stottenbergs. In August, during a packed news conference in Manhattan, the authorities returned the violin to the family, an instrument that had been played in plain view for some 31 years. The Gibson ex Huberman Stradivarius of 1713 is a antique violin made by Antonio Stradivari of Cremona, and the Gibson, while owned by Bronislaw Huberman, which was stolen twice, the first time the violin returned shortly after the theft, the second theft, possibly by musician Julian Altman, occurred in the evening of the 28th of February 1936, backstage at the Carnegie Hall, while Huberman performed on his Goronius of 1731. Though Huberman never saw the Gibson again, the instrument was recovered some 50 years later in 1985 as a result of Altman's deathbed confession to his wife that he had bought the stolen violin from a friend for $100, and in 1988 she returned the Strad over to Lloyd's, which paid her a $263,000 finder's fee, and they then sold the violin for $1.2 million to Norbert Branian, an acclaimed English violinist. The Gibson ex Huberman is currently owned by violinist Joshua Bell. Bell had held and played the violin, and Branian jokingly told Bell that the violin could be his for $4 million. Shortly thereafter, by chance, Bell came across the violin again and discovered it was about to be sold to a German industrialist to become part of a collection. Bell then sold his current Stradivarius, the Tom Taylor, for a little more than $2 million and made the purchase of the Gibson ex Huberman for a little under $4 million asking price. His first recording made on the Gibson ex Huberman was Romance of the Violin in 2003. It was in 2001 Bell paid nearly $4 million for a Stradivarius with its own fascinating history. In 1936, a journeyman player named Julian Altman snuck into the Carnegie Hall, stole the violin from Bronislaw Huberman, disguised it with thick layers of shoe polish, and performed in Strad in B-rated gigs for decades. The Altman theft was uncovered only when he died in the mid-1980s. The story in some ways mirrors that of Tottenberg, who knew Huberman and was also a supremely gifted Jewish violinist from Poland. So, who owns the most expensive violin? Well, Anne Akiko Mears, the soul of the world's most expensive violin, Deceptive Cadence, after being stored under a bed for half a century, a $16 million violin is now in the hands of Anne Akiko Mears, who recorded Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Isaiah 53, 1-3, who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised and we esteemed him not. Jesus Christ walked this world much like these stolen Stradivarius violins. much appreciated for their amazingness, but totally unappreciated for what they really are and their true value. Question. You and I are an amazing Strad, covered with the dust and grime of this world, disguised with thick layers of shoe polish, there in plain view, awaiting the master craftsman to take us home and to present us in perfect beauty, to then ring out in the courts of glory. So will you allow Jesus to rescue you, to be discovered and restored? But then, will you let Jesus restore you to original condition, or even better? It's been so nice to share this article with you, and we look forward to meeting again. Thank you for these precious moments of your time. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this with friends and family. God will discover and recover you. Till we meet again, please stay safe.